Hey everybody, welcome to episode 134 of the AskDAP show, where I answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. On this episode, we talk about should you buy a flooded Mark 7 Golf R, why you have to move wiring on LED taillights for Mark 7s to the European ones, and common problems for Mark 7s and update.
Chris via YouTube asks, I've been living on this channel since I bought my Mark 7R. It's my first VW and I'm learning lots. Have you revisited your stance, or do you know of any common issues with the Mark 7 platform, as it's now 1.5-ish years since this video was made? Thanks and keep it up.
Alright, so common issues with the Mark 7 platform since that video. Obviously that was AskDAP 80. I don't know the date, but we will flash it on screen. It was quite some time ago, and I talked about common issues and basically just said cars haven't been around long enough for us to know. I can say that there's probably only one common problem that I'm aware of with Mark 7s at this point, that is, and I'm just not sure how prevalent it is, but and that is the thermostat housing. It is kind of like a big assembly thermostat kind of in the water pump area. It has a problem where it does leak. I have heard of that. I know there were some backorder issues with some versions of that part, which is usually a good indication. Whenever you have a backorder on a part, unless it's a brand new car, so when brand new cars come out, usually there can be varying availability of parts because they may not expect to sell that part so soon. But after a car's been out a while, if there's any availability issues, sometimes, I would say more often than not, it's an indication that part is selling often enough that they've run out of inventory in the U.S. warehouses. So thermostat housing is one of those things, and it can cause coolant leaks. Outside of that, I'm not really aware of anything else that I've heard of that I would say definitively is definitely a problem for Mark 7s. With the exception of sunroof leaks is another thing that there were some issues with. So something to look out for is there were some sunroof leak problems on some Mark 7 models.
McDerpen via YouTube asks, can someone explain to me why he needed to take out wire from pin 1 and put it into pin 3 and then bridge between pin 1 and 4? I'm just confused.
Okay, so this question was asked on a very old video that I made a long time ago. I actually thought we took the video down just to make sure we didn't confuse people, but I guess it's still up. This was showing the wiring process for how to wire LED taillights on Mark 7 cars without using our harness. This was before we developed a harness. I basically just showed people how, and then essentially what happened is we had so many people who were unhappy with having to cut the wiring in their car, they didn't want to do it, that we made a harness that actually gave you the ability to do it. We actually had a couple variations of that harness. We had one that just you had to depin stuff and move wires around, but didn't have to cut anything. And then we later came out with our versions that were just plug and play setup. So essentially what he's referring to is you have to take one wire out, move it from pin 1, put it into pin 3, and then cut and splice a wire. So really what the reason why is because one of the wires is intended to be a brake light, and you can't recode it from being a brake light on that vehicle, because what would happen is there was somebody who got some stuff worked out with the original ones where they got it, but the turn signals would flash every time because you couldn't hard code enough of the turn signal out. You can take coding, that's what you're doing with OBD11 or VAGCOM whenever you change channels within adaptation, is you're changing it to be something else. So you take X and it says it's a brake light, and you change it to a turn signal, and then it changes that wire into a turn signal. But it seemed as though on that car there was some hard coding that was built in. It would not remove the brake functionality from that wire no matter what you did. So we had to change the way we did things and make it so that you would piggyback off of another wire. So that is why. So pin 1 and pin 4 were the brake lights and the running lights built together on that, if my memory serves me correctly. And so that's actually why we had to do it that way. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
Alan via Facebook asks, anyone got some insight on buying a used car with a salvage title from flood damage? Found a nice deal on a Golf R with 20k miles for $23k. Appreciate any intel. They say it was minor flood damage in Texas, and the wear is only in the carpets, had to be replaced.
All right, Alan, so buying a flooded Mark 7R. So I absolutely positively would not do that. I've actually we've been looking for a different project for some different things recently. I am looking for an all-wheel drive Mark 7, so I have been looking on Copart for that specific reason. You will find Flood, if you're not familiar, Copart is a site that you find like damaged cars, insurance stuff. You can buy Flood cars. I suspect that most people who are asking any question like this, and really I think most people in general, have no idea what they're in for when it comes to buying a flooded car. Them saying that it was only the carpet was replaced, I mean, there's nothing to hold them accountable to if that's not actually true. And maybe they know that, maybe they don't. Also, different cars have different things in the floorboard. For example, B5 cars, Passats and Audi A4s and S4s, they had the body control module and the convenience control module and the transmission control module in the floorboards of the vehicle. So when those cars had water leaks in those circumstances, but a flood would still apply, if you got water in your floorboard of that car, it would flood those boxes, which means the modules need to be replaced and potentially any wiring that's on the floor. So anytime you run into any of these circumstances with a flood car, you have no idea what you can expect in terms of damage. We actually had a car that was some friend of ours had a friend who had a salvage car that they bought, and it was a Mark 5, and we went to shoot a video on a fuel door actuator, which, you know, we can show you what that video was, but the fuel door actuator, when we actually went to replace it, had rust on the bolts that were mounting the fuel door actuator in place, which is like roughly around yay high. So you're talking about very high up, 3.5 feet high on the car. There had been water in the car. So when you have that circumstance, there's almost no way that you're going to end up with not major issues or concerns. And frankly, most people are not really properly prepared for what you could end up having to pay to fix a car like that. I actually had a local guy, a friend of ours, who mentioned to me that he had a customer who had a Mercedes that they bought that was flooded, and similar circumstance that they were under the impression that it wasn't going to be too big to fix, and it was an expensive car. It was I think it was a C63 AMG, and with all the modules that needed to be replaced in the car, it was somewhere in the like $40,000 or $50,000 in just control modules and parts they were 100% sure needed to be replaced, and that doesn't even start to begin to know if there's any corrosion that's back through the wiring harnesses. So just if you're not familiar, that water can make its way through wiring harnesses and actually into and through the wires. And so if you just buy a flood car and hope you'll just dry it out and everything's going to work, you have no idea where that water has made it within the wiring and what it could have corroded through that process. Now, I would be willing to buy a car like that for us personally as a project under very specific circumstances, not as a car that I would recommend somebody to take home and drive and make it their daily driver. So for that reason, I always say do not buy flood cars. It's a terrible idea.
Marco via YouTube asks, what's your opinion on the Mark 6 GTI? I don't see any on your channel, and I was just curious. Can I use your Mark 7 videos towards my Mark 6 if I was wanting to do any modifications towards it? My GTI is also a DSG.
Okay, Marco. So you have a Mark 6 and you want to know my thoughts on the Mark 6, and then if that stuff applies to if the Mark 7 videos we have apply to your Mark 6. So first, the Mark 6. So I actually like Mark 6s aesthetically. Actually, in my opinion, the Mark 6 Golf R is a more attractive Golf R than the Mark 7. I know people are going to hate me for that one. Performance-wise, it's not close. The Mark 7 is a much better car, but aesthetically, I think the Mark 6 R is better looking. But do I think it's a good car? I think it's a fine car, as long as you're aware of all the stuff you need to be concerned about. We've put out a boatload of information about Mark 6 cars, and I think maybe you're talking about more. We've done a lot of TSI-related stuff, so we've done a lot of stuff for a Mark 6 GTI, but maybe just not performance stuff is probably what you're referring to. We just haven't had a car here as a project car to do all that stuff on, which is why you haven't seen one. We have that TSI car that we recently shot the engine install on, which we will have some more stuff on that in the future, which we'll link to in the description, where you can check out that information around that TSI engine. If you're not familiar, make sure you educate yourself on common problems on TSI engines. I will link to that in the description, or Nate will link to that in the description. And then in terms of Mark 7 videos, so yes, Mark 7 videos can work on that car. Most notably, the biggest one I would say would be suspension is going to look almost identical. The other videos are going to be probably slight variations. If you watch them, depending on, anytime people ask questions like this, we've had people call here and ask like, hey, how hard is that? And when we have a video, the only thing we can do is show you and say, hey, here's how hard it is. Do you think you can do this? Because me telling you what I think how hard something is not necessarily how you feel about it. Using our Mark 7 video for another thing, let's say, for example, P3 digital boost gauge comes to mind. They're popular. People like them. They're expensive, but they are a really nice mod. That is something that you could use it, and it's probably similar on a Mark 6, but it's probably not the same. So if you're not familiar with cars, if you just blindly use that information as if it's gospel, you could end up breaking something because your car is different in some way. So that's going to be true for a lot of things. But overall, the overarching theme of most things we're going to do are going to look pretty similar with variation. There's always going to be variation between what you're doing when it comes to engine-specific stuff. Spark plugs on one car versus another car. I think we have a spark plug video on TSI engines. I think we have a few, actually. So when it comes to performance modifications, I would expect to see differences. When it comes to a lot of the repair maintenance stuff, stuff's going to be similar, and anything we talk about probably applies. The suspension is a big one for sure, that if you're looking for a suspension DIY, the Mark 7 one's going to look almost identical with probably some slight variation. And that's all. Thank you so much for watching episode 134 of the AskDAP show, where I answer your Volkswagen Audi questions. If you have any questions or comments about the questions answered in this show, be sure to leave in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.